is my pleasure to welcome back Westport Superintendent of Schools, Tom Scarice, to 06880, the podcast.
Thank you, Dan.
We always have interesting conversations about important things. Today, it's smartphones in our schools. It's a hot topic nationally and here in town. Let me turn mine off.
Mine's physically over there.
So let's get right to it.
Sure.
How smart is it to have smartphones in schools?
I think it is highly problematic to have smartphones in schools, to have any kind of wearable technology on your person and with you in school, basically.
By wearable technology, you mean Apple Watch?
The watches, the earbuds, we're connected to different parts of our bodies now, our hand, our wrist, our ears. There's even some kind of funky glasses, I think you can see,
Put something on your palm.
It's every sense that we have, we're using. And for a variety of reasons, I think it's detrimental to just real good classic child development from not only elementary, but early adolescence and young adulthood. I have really come a long way because, a decade or more ago, I was throwing devices in front of kids, and I was making sure that every space was Wi-Fi'd and kids had tablets, my own 3 kids. I was all in at that point. And over time, what I've seen with my 2 eyes, what I have heard about with my ears, using my senses from faculty, from parents, and then what I've read and learned about some of the purposes and some of the uses and some of the, I'd say, some of the intentions really behind the devices are very concerning to me. So I think it's a bad idea.
Was this an aha moment or was it gradual?
It was gradual. It was incremental. I could tell you this has been brewing with me for the better part of, say, 6 or 7 years. About, I don't know, maybe 8 years or so ago, I had a meeting with my leadership team in Madison when I was superintendent, and I said, guys, going forward, I am going to ask that no one brings technology to our meetings. And I did that for a couple of reasons, because your brain cannot focus on 2 things at the same time. It's just going to go back and forth super, super fast, but you're not with me. The multitasking thing's a myth, okay? And I know that when it's on and your screen's up, I'm as guilty as checking email as you are or whatever else. So let's just attend to each other for the hour plus we're together. And I started there.
These are adults.
These are adults.
Yeah.
These are adults. And then I asked them to turn the phones off, and I asked them for all that, and I centralized communication with my secretary. So if something happened in their school and they needed to get in touch with the principal, the secretary knew that this is a protected time. I come in, I get them. And the system worked. We were able to do that. But a more insidious side started to creep up as I noticed what was being viewed more often by students, by my kids, by anybody in the free world, and the ubiquity of videos online really is what became my biggest concern. I don't think it's a stretch to say that this generation has seen more pornography than any other generation, at least in the modern era. I don't know about prehistoric times, okay, but in the modern era, how that cannot stop everyone dead in their tracks and say, how can we move heaven and earth to make sure that our kids, our boys, are not viewing the volume of pornography that they're viewing?
And the kind.
Absolutely.
It's not the pornography that we knew.
I'll tell you, it's hard enough to drive down the highway with, when my boys were 5, 6, and 7 and explain, when they ask, Dad, what does that intimate pleasures billboard mean?
Yeah.
Okay, that's one thing. And then the way things got softened on TV and the permissiveness of what we would see, I'm old-fashioned like that, okay? But this has crossed a line, and this generation, as far as I'm concerned, of what I've learned, has viewed more pornography than any other generation. What that does to a developing mind, what that does to establishing norms and values and how it corrupts a mind and even deeper, that's very, very concerning. So just take that one topic. The second topic that I think doesn't get enough airtime, but during my transition, back to your question, what really became a concern of mine is that we became and have become so desensitized to violence. just pure violence, things that I never saw as a kid. I knew it happened. I heard about the legendary fight around the corner in the hallway that the kids talked about, or, I heard about, oh my God, our friend's friend got mugged. What happened? And I heard about it. So I had an imagination as an 8, 10, 12, 15-year-old that can conjure up what that meant. Maybe I saw a movie where it was dramatized. But there's actual violence being recorded for the purposes of recording it. That's it. I'm not intervening. I'm just recording you getting cold cocked down the street in New York City. 2 kids setting up a fight in the bathroom. I'm recording and sharing it. And then every other kind of violence you could imagine, from military violence. That's the first time it hit me during probably one of the conflicts overseas, where suddenly we're seeing video of just attacks and we'd never seen before. Maybe there was some, I'm sure, on TV, on the news, but now it's on our own device and we can get lost in a loop in it in our bedroom, just looking at it for hours. From the large-scale violence to just the violation of one individual to another. So between pornography and violence, I think it has done so much bad for a young generation. I started to notice this about 6, 7 years ago, and gradually it became more of a concern of mine. And then on top of that, when I was made aware of the design, the intentional design of some of these platforms and the actual phones themselves, I thought, not only is it just open access, it's intentional to addict, to get you hooked. So I'm a purist when it comes to kids and child development. And if I have to be one of hopefully many that rings a bell, I hope that I can help serve that function.
You didn't even mention the interactivity of the violence of people participating in these pretty violent games.
Yeah.
So this gradual realization, and so what's your proposal?
So it started, the conversation that started nationally, I'd say, the better part of the last year plus or so, just, in pockets, it started to gain momentum. I think a recent book that came out late winter, early spring, Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation, it gave a whole different angle on it that became really accessible to parents and educators. And then it drew the conclusion that I had not drawn before, that it's not necessarily just a correlation between exposure to social media and some of these mental health issues. It made the leap to causation, which is probably the first that has gone out to the whole public and had a national discourse on it. So that started to gain traction. My colleagues in the region have been talking about it. There was a proposed discussion at the legislative level around banning phones in schools. So this was bubbling up, and I brought it to the board in May as a topic, just as an open topic discussion, no recommendation. The conversation probably ensued for the better part of an hour. Lots of different viewpoints, lots of questions. Obviously, operational questions always come up. And I always come back to, if it's really important, we'll figure it out. Okay. If the will is there, we'll figure it out. Okay. So I always try to put the operational questions in a parking lot until we decide what it is we're trying to accomplish first. And then the board asked, I said to the board, would you like a formal recommendation from me? And they said they would. So I wrote a pretty lengthy memo with just an uncategorical, this is it. This is an unwavering kind of recommendation of phone-free spaces, wearable technology, all that inclusive, all the way through high school. That we should provide that for kids. That's the optimal setting from my perspective.
So operationally, there are a lot of things to consider.
There are.
What are some of them? What are some of the challenges that have to be figured out? Yeah.
I think right out of the gates, we immediately go to the what ifs of, kind of the gaming the system, okay? It's going to happen, right? I mean, kids forever have found ways around the system, okay? I was one of those kids. I love the challenge of, ooh, that's the rule? How can I get around it? I mean, that's part of adolescence and childhood, and I get that. I said this tongue in cheek, but I do kind of mean it. We're coming up with a plan, and it is to protect kids, but we're not coming up with a plan to prevent explosives from entering a plane, for example. A phone will make it past the point of check-in and make it into a school. I'm sure. Okay, it's going to happen. All right. But I don't want to let this perfection become the reason why we wouldn't do it. So there's obviously the collection and how do you make this happen operationally? The Yonder bag pouch, that's one of the tools that's out there. I don't think it's the only tool, by the way, but it is one. It's being used by some schools actually in Connecticut already. So it's not like, are we kind of pushing the envelope? Yes, but there's hundreds of schools all over the country doing this already. So that's probably the biggest challenge right away. How do you keep it out? And then I think the next challenge gets into replacement tools. So we have come to rely, and COVID was part of it, but this was before COVID too. We were on a fast track as a profession to using more technology.
We've not only relied on it, but we've enabled it.
We did. And we needed it to survive in the hybrid era. And we added platforms, Schoology, Google Suite, Power School, all these different kinds of platforms that we rely on. And then simple communication tools. We use it for communication. We use it for simple calculation, for video, for pictures, and all that in classrooms. I know there's other tools out there. And again, if the will is there, and that this is probably a better space if it's phone free than not, we'll figure out what those alternative tools are. So I think the first two operational challenges are, the process for keeping it phone free, and then also what are the alternative tools that we would replace or not. We'd say, no, we're just not going to do that now. So those are the two challenges.
There's another challenge, which is the parents who like it. I want to be in constant communication with
I'm one of them. I use this example a number of times, and forgive me if you've heard this before, but I was literally standing in the corner of the staff lunchroom at Staples, getting ready to address the Staples PTA. And my son, my 15-year-old, texted me that his lunch account was low, and he didn't have enough money for lunch. And this is 9:15, 9:30, so he's definitely not home. He's definitely in school, probably in class. And he texted me, and what did I do? I texted him back, and I engaged in a conversation. And then I went on to My Payment Plus, and I put money on the account, and I texted him again. You're all set, dude. You're good to have lunch. And I do the same thing. It's, Dad, I'm not coming home from practice. I'm going straight to here. I do it all the time. I do know we existed in a time period before that. We survived. And we got through that. So it's a matter of changing some behaviors. Right now, the rising freshmen through kindergarten do not know, parents and kids, access to their kids during the school day. Okay, because they just, unless kids are, which I have stories of this too, sneaking around it and contacting their parents in bathrooms and so forth on their phone. But those generations don't. So now you have those grades don't. So now you just have the rising 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, students and parents that are used to it. It might be a time-bound problem. It may be something we have to endure for a few years if we make the switch.
What about I need to get in touch with my kid during an emergency? If there's, they're worried about safety.
We actually have a very real-world example to show why that's problematic. So first responders and the literature I've read, they're all in agreement. It's not a good idea for kids inside schools to be contacting their parents in the middle of a crisis. The quickest way to resolution is to get the first responders in there as fast as possible and to address the problem to the best of their ability. And we actually had that happen a little less than a year ago. We had a swatting incident. The swatting is when you call in a kind of a fake 911 emergency, someone with a guns in the school and so forth. But in the real time, we don't know that. We're acting as if this is real. And it's another example of how the police and the schools and the first responders work so tightly, communicating and collaborating. We resolved this issue to the best of our ability, quickly, orderly, but there were cars lining up. And
parents?
There was we had kids contacting their families, giving them the, kind of play-by-play of what's happening, what I just saw. And it's problematic for a first responder. They need to have total control of the situation. And that's what we want to have.
Now, you've said that you think there may be a difference in attitude between parents of older kids,
Yeah.
high school kids, and those who are younger.
Yeah, we definitely will. I think that generational thing also can be seen in other discussions like start times. We've talked about that as well publicly, that the start time discussion, I wasn't here for it. And I have watched the videos and I've seen the reports. It's hard to dispute the science, the sleep science and so forth. And the high school parents, obviously, and I have high school kids, I feel strongly about it as well. But because of the way our system is and the layout of our town and all those other variables, we now have elementary kids staying in school till 3:45. So you have kindergarten. I have a kindergarten teacher as my wife, okay? You have kindergarten parents and teachers saying, you're not getting much from my kid after, a certain time in the afternoon when they're 5. They're kind of done. They're wide awake at 7, okay? But 2, 3 o'clock, it's problematic. So you have a generational gap on how that problem can be solved. I think it's a good parallel to what this would be. I think the access issue you mentioned is much more of a need, a desire from a high school parent than an elementary parent. So you're going to have those same kind of opposing viewpoints there. And my job is to try to find a good, strong consensus, understanding and accepting it'll never be unanimous, and get to a place where we make a good decision.
You have talked about also a nuanced discussion.
Yeah.
That it's not, for instance, if you say, are you for banning smartphones or not, that's black or white.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the middle ground. What would school look like without smartphones?
Yeah.
So how are you going to go about generating this discussion?
So I think that the ideal state are phone-free spaces. I think that's the ideal. Operational aside, whether you use the pouches or some other tool, that to me is the ideal. I'm obviously open. That's my recommendation. I'm open to any discussions because I work for the community. I make recommendations, and there are times, like this is a good example. Technically, I could just change the rules tomorrow as superintendent. I'm empowered. That's part of my job. I could do that tomorrow. The board sets broad policy. Okay, the board can say, in the policy, we have a minimum of 20-minute recess. I can say, well, the rule's going to be 25. We're going to do 25 minutes. So as long as I'm following the board policy, then I am free to make those decisions. Now, the board can overwrite that and say, no, it's a minimum of 20, it's a maximum of 20-minute, Tom. So that's the rule. Okay, that they have the right to do that through their policy writing mechanism. So when we have those situations and we have contentious kind of topics like this and maybe divisive, I like to engage as many as possible. And in this situation, definitely be faculty, our leadership team, parents, students, and so forth, and the community in general, just to see where the appetite is and make sure that my recommendation's in line. If I'm an outlier, I have to either make a stronger case or dial it back and align my recommendation with where the community is. Right now, my recommendation is my recommendation. And I'll start in the fall by engaging faculty, by engaging students, by engaging parents, and having conversations.
Where do you think the staff is on this?
It's interesting because I think that we have asked teachers at the middle school, for example, to ensure that phones are in the backpack or locker as soon as they walk in and don't come out until the end of the day. And I think if you're a faculty member who's experienced no evidence of phones anywhere, it's not an issue for you. If you're a faculty member that has said, no, it wasn't in the backpack, they keep bringing it into class, I keep dealing with this, then you have a different opinion. High school is a little different because what we have done is we have established a rule that was established a couple years ago was you can have your phones, but when you walk into a classroom during instructional time, it's got to go, in the little phone slots, whatever, on the parking lot, if you will, on the wall. Some teachers probably are having no issue at all with that. And some are saying, yeah, it's still a problem. At the end of the day, the literature still points to the fact that if it's there or if it's here or if it's here, it's still a distraction. It's still an issue. And I think that you'll probably, in more candid moments, hear about, the fact that it's still a problem.
You've also said that you don't want the staff to have to be the enforcers of this.
That is actually one of my biggest concerns, is that it's just unsustainable. It really is. I don't think from the outside looking in, Dan, that people truly appreciate how much we ask our teachers to do. Okay, we ask them to do a ton. We really do. And we can isolate any one given task and have a conversation about perfection with that one given task without really having an appreciation for everything else that was happening at that moment in time. Okay, so, well, why didn't you stop the class, talk to the student and say, because there's 20 other kids in the class and this was happening, that, and I'm teaching, I got deadlines, I got to get my grades, I got all these things that go on in their lives. I don't think it is healthy from a relationship perspective. You know, as a parent, and I think parents can relate to this, any household who has had one conflict about their child and their technology, iPad, phone, whatever, can appreciate how hard it is for a teacher then to say, you got to put your phone away. You know, I finally had to find a way in my house through the screen time app on Apple. So it's not a discussion anymore. We don't have to talk about it. I don't have to say to my son, phone's away at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. or whatever. I don't have to say that anymore because I have a function now that just does it. And now it's just between, you know, me and him, but it's a function on the phone. When I had to say, keep reminding, put your phone away, put your phone away, put your phone away. It's this physical, emotional act. There's a conflict. It's just fraught. That does kind of replicate itself in the classroom sometimes too, when you have to keep checking and get off your phone, put your phone away. It's just not sustainable, and it's not fair to teachers, really.
Yeah. What about the argument that it's smartphones are used in education? You know, that teachers, it's part of the curriculum.
There's definitely functions that enhance learning. There's no doubt. I mean, technology, you know, I said this in my memo to the board. We've always had technology in schools, right? I mean, it's been for years, you know, I mean.
Mimeograph machines.
Always had something, right? But even go to like 50, 60 years ago, we had our first digital devices kind of surface. And then there was a little bit of the multimedia, you know, and maybe they rolled a TV in, or, you know, there was always some type of technology. What we didn't have are personal devices that cater to your likes, your needs, quite honestly, your addictions, okay? And is designed to cater to all that in your hand at all times, okay? Like that's not something we've had in schools before. And granted, that's the high school, not the middle schools. They put them away. So, you know, I think that the uses are valuable, but when I hear the list, in my mind, I kind of go off, okay, that's a camera. Okay, that's a recorder, some type of camera recording device. That's a calculator. Okay, like, yes, I'm sure there are some advanced ones as we get into some courses. It's great. But, you know, word processing, camera, calculator, again, if the will is there, I think we'll find replacement tools and the kids will thrive.
One more.
Yeah.
Kids are going to graduate into a world in which phones are ubiquitous.
Yeah.
How are they going to learn to use them responsibly if not in school?
Yeah. Well, I would hope we're not the only place they learn them to use them responsibly. They're only with us for 6-7 hours a day. And we would look at the bell-to-bell time. We wouldn't be looking to restrict after school sports and arts and all that kind of thing. I look at this a couple of ways. You know, I don't know, unless a family decides to do this privately, we don't introduce alcohol to kids before they're 21 to say, well, you're 21 years old, you're going to be at a work function when you're 23, 24, there'll be alcohol, you got to learn. Yeah. We don't do that, okay? I also think that the trade-off of all the pro-social benefits of a phone-free space, all the academic benefits of a phone-free space significantly outweigh whatever I'm going to have to learn. We're worried about executive functioning. Do we really think, besides the planning tools, okay, in a phone, do we think that really helps that executive functioning? Because I'd make the case that the distractibility piece undermines all the work we want to do in executive functioning. Yeah, I'm sure there are kids that do use their calendar, that do use, you know, the phone function for their schedule, for this. I'm sure. And I'm sure there are other ways, low tech, no tech, to do that don't compromise your executive functioning with a tool that's designed to distract you. That's the part that's lost on me. Like, there's an engineer behind that that's saying, how can I get your attention? How can I keep your attention? How can I fasten it to this device? That's the design mechanism. So I'm sure there's alternatives.
And these are the same designers who, in their homes in Silicon Valley, are not letting their kids use the devices that they engineer.
Yeah, I am sure at some point, and I'll give a general time frame. I'll say, I don't know, 2004, 2002, whatever. There was a time frame in that era where, because I was a young adult in the 90s. I mean, I had, I guess you would call it social media. I don't know. It was that gabong, 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 and you'd get on into a chat room or whatever. But then there was the desire to monetize it. And when the monetization movement hit in social media, that really, the whole industry to me turned dark, because it became about, how do I get you? How many products give away their product for free? And there's got to be a financial benefit. You're not paying for Facebook. You're not paying for Instagram. You're not paying for Snapchat. You're not paying for all these functions, okay? So they're giving it away for free. They're making their money some way, okay? They could be using your data. They're definitely throwing ads at you, and they're targeted at you. These are just unseemly activities for kids. You're an adult. Listen, I went out for ice cream the other night. I went because the family didn't want to go. They had to get it for everybody, so I went to get the ice cream. And as I sat and waited, I watched 17, 18 people around me. Probably all but one or two were on their phones. So adults are as addicted as their kids.
All ages, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're as addicted. I get it, but they're adults, okay? For kids, anything that elicits dopamine to the degree that social media and phones do, we regulate the best we can, right? I mean, like those, not exercise, obviously, but we regulate smoking, drinking, gambling, like those dopamine hitting activities like that. And I don't think this is any different.
But we also recognize that too much exercise is bad.
Yeah.
So the last question,
Yeah.
you indicated that this is a heavy lift, a community lift.
Mhm.
How do you get the community to come along? What's your strategy for selling this proposal of yours?
So I learned a long time ago that don't ever make a breadcrumb trail to what you're thinking, okay? Just put it out there. So that's step one, is to make sure that folks knew where I stood and where I stand on this. And this is not without great thought. And, I didn't do a thesis on it, but I did a good amount of research, and I put it in writing. So it's a document that I presented to the board, but I also sent out in a parent message. So they saw what I sent to the board, so they know my thinking on it, what it's backed up by, my rationale, and then also, any of the obstacles that are out there, like the ones you mentioned and others, and how we can overcome those obstacles. That's the first step. The second step is to engage in a conversation, because I can have, in my mind, my IQ is never higher than when I'm rationalizing my own thinking, okay? So I could put my thoughts out there, but if it's not resonating, I either have to change my pitch, or I have to change my recommendation. So now comes the other side where I need to listen. Here's where I stand. Here's the reasons why. Let's have conversations about this. And I think it's a little more nuanced, where it's not just a simple thumbs up, thumbs down. I think there's a lot more to it. And I also think when we're talking about students, students may say different comments individually than they would say in a group, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different kind of strategies I think we have to think about. And then also be mindful of, what our own biases might be when we have conversations. So I'm going to try to be mindful of that as well and be fair. I am very clear there will not be a unanimous sense out there. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised, and there'll be more support than I realized, and we can look to do something sooner than later. It will not be the first day of school. And I made that clear, because we love in school when problems emerge in like September, October, and we can solve them by May and June. That's the best, right? We started talking about this really publicly in May, and kind of behind the scenes in the spring. So we need to make sure we do this deliberately and do this the right way. And, the high school principal, Stafford Thomas, pointed out to me, sometimes things are not bad to start mid-year some point because you can make your corrections. Kids have their routines and everything. Like starting day one is not always the best for some things, and that might apply here.
Have you gotten any community feedback?
I have gotten, I wouldn't say more emails on this topic than any other issue, but pretty close. I've gotten a lot of emails from parents, and I would say overwhelmingly, not 100%, overwhelmingly supportive. What struck me is that this is the first topic where I've gotten contacts from parents in the past couple of weeks, well over 100 emails at least. And what can I do to help you? That I found interesting because other topics we've talked about, not that the parents are always willing to jump in. I mean, this is a very type A active community. I love it. But this one in particular, that was unsolicited. It was, if I can be somewhere, if I can support this, let me know. And a lot of personal narratives. I'm a father of 3 kids with these ages. I'm a mother of 4 kids with these ages. I had one who said, I might be your youngest parent. I'm a 2011 high school grad. I might be your youngest parent. I have a preschooler coming up, and I feel very strongly and I support what you're doing. What can I do? So it's been the range. Yeah.
This is a discussion that will clearly continue.
Indeed it will.
Thank you, Superintendent Scarice, for coming on 06880, the podcast, and explaining it, to be continued. And I'm going to check I have a lot of messages. All that dopamine hit.
That's it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it as always.
You bet.